Okay, moving on to presentation by Rebecca, the landscape manager, and Mark Heptig on regarding their respective operations, the use of chemicals in Rossmoor. Rebecca.
He's just going to put down the screen for me. Okay.
We should move, right? Shouldn't we move, Bob? Yeah, but our heads are in the way. See how I trust you with safety.
I'll protect you.
They're turning it on. Oh, it's not on up here. Okay, here we go. So I've been told I have 15 minutes. I'm hoping to come in way under that and keep this as simple and concise as possible. I just wanted to sort of lay the groundwork that the reason that we've been asked to give this presentation today is to let everybody know that we have been listening to the residents. Not only that, this has been something that's been very much on our radar for at least as long as I've been here and probably before that. And we do have a strategy in place that I've been using, which I will walk you through today. So here's our table of contents. First, we'll talk about why it's important to address weeds in the first place, what our current options are, and our strategy and philosophy at this point in time. So I want to start off with an overarching goal. We want to manage the landscape in the most effective and least toxic way over the long term. There's not much point, the way that I see it, in reducing toxicity in the short term if that then creates a problem which causes us to become much more toxic in the long term. I think we have to take a long-term approach to all of this. And of course, this is all a moot point if it's not effective. So why are weeds bad? I'll run through this. I know this sounds like a really silly question, but there are people that you'll hear from that come from a camp that say, well, a weed is just a plant in an unwanted place, which is true. But they are also detrimental in a lot of other ways, so I just need you to understand that going forward. Weeds are very aggressive growers, and they overcome our desirable plants very, very quickly. Ornamental plants, native communities, I'm sure you've all driven down the coast and seen entire hillsides taken over by pampas grass and things of that nature. They escape the landscape really easily. In short, they are faster, stronger, and more resilient than the plants that we want to preserve. They multiply exponentially. So I want everybody to take a look at this slide and just hold a number in your head for how many seeds you think are coming off that stalk alone. You don't have to tell me, just hold it for a later slide. So clearly, we need to address this weed before it becomes that one, before it very quickly becomes that one. They get out of control extraordinarily quickly. Weeds are really hard to get rid of. If they were easy to get rid of, they wouldn't be such a difficult problem. This is a dandelion in concrete. Anyone who's ever gardened will know that this weed is difficult to get rid of for two reasons primarily. For one thing, has anybody ever tried to pull a weed like this out of a crack in a concrete? What happens? It breaks off. And the root is still there, and the root grows back, especially with perennial weeds. Not only that, if you take a look at this slide, see each of these little white things, that is each one of these. So even if you did manage to get rid of this weed, whatever your number was that I asked you to hold in your head, I see 4 of those here and 6 more that are ready to set seed. This is from a single plant. My number was 100, so this plant has already set 400 seeds. So just put that into perspective. If we don't treat this one weed, it will rapidly turn into many, many more. So what are our options for getting rid of weeds? Well, there's hand pulling, which is, of course, entirely non-toxic. It's probably the only truly non-toxic option that we have available to us. We utilize this to an extent. Weeds that are big enough that we can actually extract the root, we do pull those. So take a look at this picture. I want to talk a little bit about the limitations for hand pulling. Of course, it takes a lot of hand labor, and hand labor requires money, which, this community is very sensitive to the coupon, as is everybody. Take a look at this picture. You can't see them all, but there are 10 people in this picture pulling weeds on an area that looks to me to be about 100 square feet. We're 1,800 acres, and each acre is 44,000 square feet. So when you start to put all that together, it just becomes very expensive very quickly. As we saw in the earlier slide, not all weeds can be pulled. You try to pull them and they break off and then they come back. If you're really unlucky, you'll break off pieces of the roots which can then each regenerate into its own weed. So sometimes you pull a weed and you've created 2 or 3 or 10 more. And then with some of the most resilient weeds, they then focus all of their energy into their root system and then they become stronger. So the next time it comes back, it's even more difficult to get out. So some of the traditional herbicides that have been used are, of course, Roundup and glyphosate. That's what I'm going to talk about primarily just because it's what's such a hot topic right now. There are hundreds, maybe more herbicides to choose from on the market. Some have been around for decades, some have been around for much shorter times than that. Glyphosate is such a hot topic because it is so popular. It is the most popular, the most widely used herbicide in the United States. And it is widely used for the following reasons. It has a volatility index that is thousands of times less than that of water, which means that once it goes to the ground, it's very difficult to breathe, so it doesn't end up in the air or in the atmosphere, or most importantly, in your lungs. It doesn't move readily in soil, so it doesn't leach into groundwater, which is a big concern for herbicides. I don't want herbicides in my air, I don't want herbicides in my water, so it's important to me to know that my herbicide is going to stay where I put it. It's been around since 1974, which means that we have a lot of data on glyphosate. It's less toxic than other herbicides. This is a relative comment. Please don't take this as me saying that I have an opinion on whether glyphosate is toxic or not, but compared to very many other herbicides that are available to us, it is amongst the least toxic. And of course, it's effective, which means we don't have to use very much of it, which is something I'll touch on a little later in the slide deck. Okay, so what are the cons of glyphosate and Roundup and other traditional herbicides? Well, obviously, there are varying levels of toxicity. Glyphosate and other herbicides can be extraordinarily toxic. I don't mean to say that glyphosate can be, but other herbicides can be extraordinarily toxic. A lot of herbicides are on the Prop 65 list. As you know, glyphosate is also now on the Prop 65 list, and it's all controversial. So I just want to put this into a little bit of perspective. This man standing under a crop duster that you see in the photo, I don't care if he's being covered with glyphosate or another herbicide or an organic herbicide or soap. If I'm him, I'm worried. I don't want to spend my days eating, drinking, and bathing in any kind of herbicide. But I just want to clarify that that's not what we're doing here. I'm sure you've all seen them. We have backpack sprayers that are less than 1/10 of the actual solution. The rest is all water. And we have wands that allow us to get very, very close to the weed itself. So then we have organic herbicides. So what are the pros of organic herbicides? Well, there's the perception of safe, which is important. We all want to feel safe in our environment. I mean, that's not something to be undermined at all. But like anything else, there are limitations. All of the organic herbicides that are on the market currently are contact herbicides, which means that they do what's called burn down to the weed, which means they kill the visible section of the weed. What did we learn earlier? That if you don't kill the root on a perennial weed, it will regenerate. So the weeds return, which means that we have to use much, much more of this chemical because we need to return to that same weed 2, 3, 10 times. The product itself is more expensive. And when you combine that with the fact that you have to use more of it, the price starts to compound. A real hot topic in agricultural communities in particular are that a lot of weeds are developing resistance. So if you don't kill it the first time and it manages to survive, it can then start casting seeds that are resistant to the herbicide that you're using. So it's important when you kill a weed that you kill it the first time. Oops, why does this keep jumping ahead of me? And in my opinion, the most important thing is that we don't know the long-term toxicity of these products. A lot of them are brand new on the market. They haven't been tested for very long. Some are older, but haven't had the right tests performed. And we just don't have enough data to really say for sure what the long-term effects of these new products are going to be. So, unfortunately, we all want this to be true. We all want to believe that organics are safe. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. Organic does not mean non-toxic. Some of the most poisonous compounds on the planet are organic and naturally occurring. Lead, mercury, arsenic. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Just think of one in your head and it's most likely naturally occurring. Oh, why does this keep jumping ahead? Raise your hand if you've actually looked at the Prop 65 list, anybody? Okay, so I did, and fair enough that you haven't looked at it because it's very, very long. But one of the first things that it says in the top is that it includes a wide range of naturally occurring and synthetic chemicals. Just because it's organic or occurs naturally does not make it non-toxic. Some surprising things on the list, just a fun game. Aloe Vera is on the Prop 65 list. I forget what this is called. It's some kind of nut that comes from a palm tree. And the last one is Bracken Fern, a plant that we actually have quite a bit of here and is very widespread all over North America and the world, might I add. And just to bring it full circle, it happens to be an invasive weed. So again, just to bring things into perspective, this shouldn't be an all or nothing conversation. This doesn't have to be ban Roundup or ban these certain herbicides and substitute them with something else that we know less about, may or may not be less toxic. There may, and there probably will come a time where we will have herbicides that are organic or non-toxic that we know that we can use and that we can trust, but we're not there yet. And I don't think that hastily rushing into something that hasn't been fully vetted is a responsible thing to do for a community this big. So instead of doing the substitution method or doing the all or nothing method, these are our revised goals. Reduce all of the herbicide usage in Rossmoor. Synthetic, organic, whatever it is that we're using, let's dial in on that and get it as low as we possibly can. We're going to do that by taking a whole systems approach to minimize and prevent weeds in the first place. And in doing that, we're also going to increase plant vigor and longevity by building long-term soil health. So how are we going to do that? It's a big ask. For one thing, weeds are opportunistic. They like to seed in bare soil. So the first thing we can do is reduce the opportunity for the seeds to germinate. And we do that by adding mulch. There are all kinds of studies that show that mulch can reduce the germination of weed seeds by almost 80%. And then we also get these added benefits that it conserves water, it regulates soil temperature, it builds soil health over time, and it looks nice. There are different opinions on mulch. I personally think it looks very nice. When we put down a blanket of mulch like this, we put compost underneath, which is full of organic organisms, and those also build the soil over time, which then feeds the plants. So year over year, we're getting healthier and healthier soil that is also able to retain more water. We're also irrigating to the base of the plant. This is controversial in a whole other way that we can talk about another time. But we want to irrigate to the base of the plant because weeds, like any other plant, want water. There are plenty of weeds that will come up in the spring and die in the summertime, but perennial weeds will often want water. So if we can reduce the amount of real estate available to them where they're able to get the water that they need, that's going to automatically reduce the amount of weeds that we have. Let's treat weeds when they're really small. A small weed takes a small amount of chemical to kill. A large weed takes a large amount of chemical to kill. The trick to this is that we have to, again, use an herbicide that works. Because if we use the burn down method on a small weed, it still has quite a bit of its energy left in its root stock and it will just regenerate. So we'll have to come back to it. And then, probably most importantly, let's get to the weeds before they germinate. Again, do you want to treat one weed or do you want to treat 100 weeds? It's just common sense, but again, we need to have a strategy for doing this that actually works because a weed can grow from a plant to a weed seed producing thing very, very quickly. And even if we had tons and tons of hand labor, we just quite physically wouldn't be able to get around to all of these before they start to germinate. So returning to our goal, we want to manage the landscape in the most effective and least toxic way over the long term. I think that an approach like this is most effective because we'll be ending up with a healthier, more beautiful landscape over time. It's the least toxic method because while we may not necessarily be going organic, so to speak, we'll be using less and less and less chemical year over year, and we'll be using as little of it as possible. And over the long term, the landscape should start to get better instead of deteriorate. We're teaching it to feed itself instead of, giving it. Anyway. And then, of course, in addition to this, we also get healthier plants and soil, reduced water use, and a more attractive landscape. So that's it. And if I want you guys to have any takeaways, it's the following. We have to address the whole system. We need to do it in a planned way. We need a strategy. We can't be hasty about these kinds of things because you can create much bigger problems than you've started out with. And I don't think that we want to invest a whole lot of our stock into products that we don't have enough information about. So again, we're moving in this direction already. We have been for quite some time, but we need to do it slowly, and then when the time is right for us to switch to the best product available when it comes around, we will be ready for it. Thank you. Golf course management is a totally different animal, so I'm going to pass it to Mark after this, but you had a question, Bob.
I want to thank you. That was very well organized and well done. I do have a couple questions that I want to clarify from the last board meeting where some issues came up. There was a question about whether we have on hand and available to the residents all chemicals applied by GRF and contractors that come in here. And I've heard that we do and we don't. I want to clarify that. So what?
We do have it. We have a lot of contractors. And we also have our own staff, and each one, each contractor and our staff, we use different types of chemicals depending on what you're targeting. So we've been collecting that information from everybody, and we'll post it to a place, I believe, I don't want to speak to that, but yes, we do, is the answer to your question.
Okay, well, I would urge you to get it online so it is available to everybody. I think that would be useful. Sure. The other thing that came up was that I think it's Mutual 8 has this non-toxic program and that it's comparable or less in cost, but then I've heard that that was just a sort of a lost leader to get their foot in Rossmoor, that really isn't a viable option as far as equal costs. So could you clarify what you know about that?
Sure. So yes, so we are experimenting in Mutual 8. It's a very small mutual, so it's easy to keep control of with this new contractor using all organic methods. And we are having good luck so far. They've only been here for 4 months, so we haven't even been through more than one season with them, so it's very difficult to say what the long-term effects of what they're doing are going to be. And you're absolutely right that they gave a very, very competitive price, but they also told me directly that they were, quote, eating costs to get their foot in the door in Rossmoor. And I was told by the CEO of the same company that an organic organic maintenance schedule is typically about 25 to 35% more than traditional methods in their experience. So yes, it is usually more. That's again if you're using an organic chemical substitution approach, which you have to decide if you want to do that in the first place. And yeah, I would just caution that we want to wait until they're here at least an entire year to see how things are going. So for example, I pointed out in my presentation that one of the reasons glyphosate is as popular as it is because it's low VOC. I've gotten a lot of comments from people in Mutual Aid that say, what is that beautiful smell? It smells so nice up here, like cinnamon and clove. That alone is evidence that the chemical is volatilizing and it's just, these are the things that we need to know before we really expand this out to the entire community. Now, that's not to say that what's happening up there is toxic, and it may be something they're smelling that has nothing to do with the actual chemical that they're putting down. But these are things we really want to know before we jump into it.
So to be clear, they're not doing all hand pulling. They're using some chemicals. They're just called organic chemicals.
Precisely.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so golf course maintenance, totally different ballpark. I'm handing it over to Mark, and then after that, there'll be another presentation.
Okay, Mark. Go ahead.
So good morning. Thank you, Rebecca, for that information, especially on the herbicides, which we have some of those, of course, we use. Those of us who are charged with the duty of maintaining the golf courses understand that we actually have a much broader and important role. We are maintaining the major green area, the open space, the park, the nature preserve for the entire Rossmoor community. It is our management of this land that makes it feasible for everyone and everything to enjoy the area. The approximate 150 acres that are the golf course property encompass many important features. The spectacular trees of so many varieties, the wandering creek, the beautiful hillsides are all a treasure to this community. Our stewardship of these assets has led us to several opportunities but also conflicts when it comes to balancing the aesthetic needs, the environmental concerns, the playability issues, and the economic restraints throughout the golf courses. For example, when it comes to the trees, we have over 1,500 trees on the golf courses. People don't realize that. We have made a concerted effort to keep a park-like feel by planting 209 trees in the last 13 years, while only losing 91 due to age or damage or disease. The courses are home to deer, raccoons, squirrels, foxes, turkeys, hawks, skunks, geese, coyotes, and many other animals. We have bird boxes, I think it's 32, throughout both courses that provide homes for families. Our policies on chemicals means we must make it a safe environment for them too. Part of our stewardship has to do with water management. Several years ago, our golf course superintendent designed a system that allowed us to capture runoff from throughout the valley. This has made us less dependent on East Bay mud. We didn't have to open the valve for East Bay mud until June 19th this year, which has saved us a lot of money, as I mentioned earlier. Our 5-year mulch program that now covers over 10 acres of the golf course property has netted a savings of 1.5 million gallons through the month of July just this year. So when it comes to the management of chemicals used on the golf course, we are conservative, low in frequency, and aware of the impact on the land. To adequately maintain the golf courses at Rossmoor, it is necessary to apply fertilizers and pesticides. The amount of fertilizer and pesticide applications made at Rossmoor and the frequency of those applications are far less than you'd see at other golf courses in our region. The primary reasons is that, The primary reason for reducing chemical use at Rossmoor is because we choose to raise the height of the cut on the mowers on all of our turf areas compared to other courses. The longer grass enables deeper roots to grow, which allow the plants to take on water and nutrients efficiently to better reduce plant stress. Also, in most cases, fertilizers, pesticides, and other chemicals used on the golf courses are extremely expensive. The high cost of the materials alone is enough to limit the use of chemicals and use them only when necessary. There are several parts to a golf course, so they're treated very differently when it comes to chemical usage. The putting greens get the most applications because they are the most susceptible to disease. It is necessary to make between 6 and 8 fungicide applications per year on the 3.7 acres of surface that are putting greens. Climatic conditions determine how much fungicide application we may use each year. Just in comparison, other local clubs in our area may make applications in the 20 to 30 range per year. So 6 to 8 is quite a lot less. During the rainy part of the year, a fungus called pink snow mold will kill almost all the annual bluegrass on a green if it's not treated. During the periods of the year where there's overcast mornings, the fungicide can be, a disease called dollar spot can come into play. That kills both types of grass growing in the greens if we don't apply. During the summer months, disease pressure increases severely and turf loss may occur from infestations of several more serious fungus species. Summer patch, pythium, fairy ring, and southern blight are all possible here if we don't put down the proper fungicide. It is necessary to spray a selective herbicide 1 time per year to eradicate broadleaf weeds that can also grow in the greens. In recent years, approximately, like I said, 10 acres of non-irrigated turf have been replaced with non-irrigated mulch. It is necessary to make several spot treatment applications per year with a herbicide to reduce the amount of weed growth in those areas. There are significantly less weeds when we spray a second time during the year. During 2017, we made the choice to use a small sprayer instead and are applying the herbicide at much lower pressure than in years past. Selective herbicides are included in the fertilizers to prevent crabgrass and eradicate broadleaf weeds and are applied twice a year on the other 120 acres of turf on the Rossmoor golf courses. That would include the tees, the fairways, and the roughs. There are many undesirable types of weeds that exist in our fairways and rough areas that we make an attempt to eradicate, but we really can't get them all. We simply do not have the resources or the manpower to eradicate the problematic weeds compared to higher-end country clubs. We do make the attempt to eradicate some of these weed types when they get close to our greens and our tees. It is necessary to apply an aquatic herbicide in our reservoir. We do that about 8 times per year. If not treated, a thick layer of algae would cover the entire surface of the lake by summers, when we get into summer. If not treated, the algae will clog the main pump station's filtration system and not allow proper water flow. Regarding insecticides, we have been very fortunate and that we have not had to apply any insecticides for several years on the golf courses. So that's kind of a rundown of the different areas of the golf course.
We have one question, Mark.
Certainly.
So I haven't seen any plans for further turf reduction and mulching. Does that mean that you're not going to do any more of that in the near future? Putting the mulch down?
We continue to look at areas and plan out and do certain smaller areas this time, but at the moment, no. We don't have any large areas we're doing.
Would it make sense, or clarify for me if you would? My understanding is that when you did that, the large areas a year or two ago, that there wasn't a kind of weed cloth put down first, and that's one of the reasons a lot of the weeds came up. Is that the case? And if so, if you do it in the future, can you do some other treatment, like a weed cloth, before putting the mulch that would reduce the need to apply weed
We didn't
killers?
do the weed cloth just because of the large areas. What we've been happy to see, which I mentioned in the report, is that actually once we make an application, the second application is rather small, and right now we're just spotting with the herbicide with a backpack. So we don't have the large weed growth that you might expect. We put the layer on extremely heavy, so we haven't had as much come through the, there's different ways of managing the mulch. We've been very happy with our results, not having as much weeds.
So to be clear then, on the course itself, you're applying with a large sprayer, but in the mulch areas, you're now doing just backpack application?
That's correct.
Good. Okay.
Steve?
I wonder, Mark, if you'd make a comment on soil conditions included in Rebecca's remarks, and I know that you two work well together. Do you see any opportunity to enhance the soil condition with amendment in order to improve the turf strength and the benefit that that might provide in keeping weeds out?
This has been an ongoing problem for the Rossmoor golf courses, but it's also been something that Blake and I have attacked for several years. There is substantially better grass in a lot of areas due to sanding heavily in some areas, and our weed control program, and then overseeding. And this last spring we put in a Bermuda grass, a hybrid, which is taking hold in a lot of areas and expanding, which will help us in the long run. Overall, we have a lot of clay soil here. And when we get to the hot, again, what a weird year. We had all this rain, and then it turns right around. We have maybe one of the hottest summers we've had. Certainly in my recent memory, I've been here 25 years, we've had a lot of days over 100. That really stresses out the plants, but it also affects the substructure, which is the clay. The clay basically just closes up, and it's hard as this floor right in front of me. So it becomes very difficult to keep the plants alive when you get extreme temperatures. That's why coming up here in September, we'll start our fall maintenance, which will be not only aerifying the greens and sanding those, but we'll be aerifying fairways and reseeding and doing a lot of work in those areas to, again, try and improve the strength so that they can recover and be ready for fall and into next year.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.